almost a blackguard. Okay, get this. Those are the words of T.S. Eliot, one of the most important poets of the 20th century, talking about Percy Bysshe Shelley, a literal giant of the Romantic era. It's a shocking statement, right? One literary titan basically calling another a scoundrel.
And look, this wasn't some private remark whispered in a back room. Eliot was the cultural gatekeeper of his time, the voice of modernism. When he passed judgment, people listened. And what he said about Shelley was just brutal. He dismissed him as immature and repulsive. And for decades, that pretty much became the accepted story.
But what if that whole public takedown was hiding something? What if it was really a smokescreen for a relationship that was way more complicated and honestly a lot more intimate? All right, let's get into this.
Because when you really start to look closer, the evidence suggests that far from hating Shelley, T.S. Eliot was completely haunted by him, and that his own legendary work carries this profound, hidden debt to the very poet he so famously rejected. So, first things first, let's lay out the official story. This is the case that Eliot built in public, the one that shaped how people thought about these poets for generations. I mean, the charges are just damning. Eliot called Shelley's ideas repellent and childish. He blew off his poetry as bad jingling. He even went after Shelley as a person, calling him humorless and self-centered. It really feels like an open and shut case of pure literary disgust. But this is where our little investigation takes a sharp turn. Because if you actually dig into Eliot's other writings, you find some serious cracks in this story. And I mean big ones. It's like the star witness for the prosecution starts contradicting his own testimony on the stand. And the contradiction is just staggering. It's night and day. The same Eliot who called Shelley's work bad jingling also turned around and praised its beauty of music and a beauty of content. He dismissed Shelley's ideas as being for teenagers, yet he also called him the one English poet of his century who could have been on the same level as Dante. This isn't just a small disagreement, it's a total reversal. So what on earth is going on here? Well, to find the answer, we have to stop looking at what Eliot said about Shelley and start looking at what he actually wrote in his own poetry. Turns out, the clues have been hiding in plain sight this whole time, buried in some of the most famous poems of the 20th century. Okay, check this out. This is where the connection becomes absolutely undeniable. In his masterpiece, The Wasteland, Eliot writes, pressing lidless eyes and waiting for a knock upon the door. It's this image of pure dread and exhaustion. But where did he get it? You go back to Shelley's Prometheus Unbound, and a character threatens a tortured hero, asking if he thinks they'll just laugh into thy lidless eyes. In both poems, the phrase means the exact same thing: a helpless horror, the agony of not being able to look away from some terrible knowledge. And the borrowing gets even more blatant. This wasn't just something he did when he was young. Way late in his career, in a play from 1950, Eliot has a character recite a full 9-line passage straight out of Shelley. So the key takeaway here is that this connection wasn't just a phase, it was a lifelong obsession. Why would a poet quote someone so much if he supposedly couldn't stand them? To really get to the motive, we have to go deeper than just the words on the page. The real connection, the reason Eliot could never truly shake Shelley, is that they shared a fundamental, core belief about the very nature of reality itself. They were both what you'd call radical skeptics. And here's the core idea. We can never really know an objective external world. The world that we experience, all of it, is filtered through our own minds. Our senses, our thoughts, our memories, they're all just our subjective interpretations. There's no way to know what's really out there. Here's Shelley laying it out perfectly. Nothing exists but as it is perceived, plain and simple. If you can't perceive it, for all you know, it doesn't exist. The world is basically a creation of our own consciousness. And now listen to Eliot decades later, coming to the exact same conclusion in his philosophy dissertation at Harvard. He wrote that if you dig deep enough, no knowledge will survive analysis, meaning anything you think you know about the world eventually just falls apart into patterns and interpretations. They were wrestling with the exact same metaphysical problem. So if they agreed on something so huge and fundamental, why all the public attacks? Well, the answer comes from Eliot himself, and it reveals this incredible psychological drama that was playing out behind the scenes of literary history. Eliot actually admitted that as a young man, he had what he called an invasion of the adolescent self by Shelley. He was so influenced that Shelley's way of writing became the only way for him. So to become T.S. Eliot, the father of a new, classical modernism, he had to perform a kind of public exorcism. He had to kill his romantic father figure to forge his own identity. Both poets saw reality as split into two worlds. You've got the world of life, the reality you can see and touch, but underneath it, there's the world of death, this shadow world of ideas, dreams, and imagination. They both believed that in certain special moments, these two worlds could actually intersect, and that's where poetry comes from. So they were starting from the same map of reality, but they took two completely different paths. Shelley, when faced with all this uncertainty, chose to just stay suspended between fear and hope. He accepted that we might never find any absolute truth. But Eliot, he couldn't live in that doubt. He needed an anchor, something solid to stand on. And for him, that answer was religious faith. He chose the certainty of Anglo-Catholicism to solve the very problem that Shelley was content to leave wide open.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Let's get to our final verdict and wrap up what this new understanding of these two poets really means.
And a quick shout out here. The incredible academic detective work for this breakdown comes from an article by George Franklin in the journal ELH, which meticulously uncovered this whole hidden history. So yeah, the verdict is pretty clear. Eliot's harsh criticism, it wasn't the whole story, not even close. It was a mask, and behind that mask was a deep, complicated, and lifelong philosophical and poetic debt to the very writer he felt he had to reject in order to become himself. And this whole story leaves us with a really fascinating question. This isn't just about two long-dead poets. It's about how art gets made, about anxiety and influence. It makes you wonder, what great artists working today are publicly tearing down the very influences that they secretly owe the most to?